This morning at about 11:14 a.m., Harrison County Sheriff's Department, along with the United States Marshal's Fugitive Task Force, was following up on information on an individual that we have been looking for since February, Ian Goble. We had several warrants outstanding for him for distributing and manufacturing methamphetamine, for possession of precursors to manufacture a controlled substance, and visiting a common nuisance. This individual was involved in a previous incident back February the 10th, where he was involved in a 3-county, 53-minute pursuit in Harrison, Washington, and Orange County. During that pursuit, they ran over one of our deputies and hit him, and Ian Goble was shot twice, or shot once in the abdomen, and Mr. Holloway was shot in the hand. The officer received a concussion, leg and back injuries, and has since been released. Ian Goble was taken to a university hospital, and we had requested that they notify us prior to his release. We did a check on his condition and found out that he had been released 2 days earlier. Apparently their new operating procedures do not allow them to call law enforcement to let them know that they have a wanted fugitive that they are releasing from the hospital. As of this morning, we had numerous sightings and locations of Mr. Goble. The task force and our detectives were setting on a position this morning when they observed Ian Goble leave the residence. Marked units were dispatched. They tried to blockade him at Highway 135 and Whiskey Run Road. During that initial attempt to stop him, they avoided, ran off the road, went around, and the pursuit started. The pursuit lasted about 15 minutes when they crested a hill and went airborne and apparently ruptured the oil pan on their car. As they were slowing down, a black Nissan passed the patrol car with lights and siren in pursuit of a gold Oldsmobile, almost running the officer, striking the officer, running him off the road, came back on the pursuing vehicle. The car pulled in front of the pursuit. It came to a halt. Mr. Goble bailed out of the Oldsmobile, jumped into the Nissan, and Mr. Matlock was taken into custody, the driver of the first car, and then a second pursuit ensued with Ian Goble and an unknown person at this time. Another 30 minutes in 2 counties, Harrison and Washington County, over, if any of you are familiar with the rural roads in Harrison, Washington County, there are not many intersections to cut somebody off. There were numerous law enforcement agencies, Indiana State Police, Washington County Sheriff's Department, Harrison County Sheriff's Department were involved in the pursuit. Numerous attempts were made to block and get them in, which were all unsuccessful due to the county and state roads that they were traversing. Eventually, the car approached a Washington County pursuing vehicle coming eastbound, and they were going westbound on Orchard Road between Beck's Mill Road and Highway 135. At that point, the Washington County detective conducted a pit maneuver, which actually spun the individual out, and he was taken into custody along with a female by the name of Kayla Sizemore. There are drugs in the car. We haven't gotten a positive feedback on the drugs yet. Mr. Matlock was charged with assisting a criminal and resisting law enforcement. Ms. Sizemore has been arrested for assisting a criminal, criminal recklessness, and resisting law enforcement. Again, this pursuit lasted about 45 minutes over approximately 45 to 50 miles. Almost identical to the pursuit that occurred in February, except in this pursuit there were 3 individuals that they attempted to hit and run off the road to cause the police to have to render aid to innocent persons. So at this point, I'll take any questions.
What speeds do you believe you were going at this?
Sometimes speeds, I think, were up to 100 miles an hour. Depending on the highway, when you get on 135 and 64, some of the state highways, you have some pretty good stretches. But then when you're in the rural roads, county roads, there are a lot of twisting, narrow roads, but the speeds were up and down.
And it's our understanding he had to go to the hospital this time around too?
Well, he alleged that his abdomen was hurting him, and it was hurting all over his entire body. We didn't see any injuries. He was just the left front of the detective's car hit the left rear of the evading car. There was no apparent injuries to either one of them. The female has already been released and is in custody in the county jail here. He's still being evaluated at Harrison County Hospital.
Do you all have deputies at the hospital?
We do. He will not be leaving us. We won't experience U of L's problem again.
Can I clarify one thing? The officer that knocked him off the road was going the opposite direction, coming east?
Yes.
And hit him as he was passing him?
Yes.
Cut over and hit him in the left rear?
It's undetermined at this time whether they tried to run him off the road. The officer definitely was going to try to pit him. That's our intentions all along, was to try to put some stop sticks out in front of him, but we could never get to an intersection because these county roads, they're switching back and forth, so you're anticipating going one direction, we end up going another one. So as they were calling the pursuit out, all of us were trying to get in position to cut them off, and at this particular time the Washington County detective was able to be coming eastbound when they were coming westbound in his direction, and he was able to pit him. I think it might probably realistically been a combination of both. He was trying to run him off the road. Luckily the officer was a better driver and knew what he was doing.
I was going to say, it kind of sounds like a game of chicken at that point.
It had been during the pursuit. There were 3 cars that were run off the roadway during this pursuit that they actually literally run off the road, and in hopes that if they hit somebody or caused an injury accident, the police would stop and render aid to the people rather than continue the pursuit with him. That's been his mentality back in February as it was again today.
How many law enforcement officers were involved in this? Like, how many cars were trying to get him stopped?
It's hard to say. If you had a helicopter up, I know there was probably 15 or 20. It looked like we were all there. You had the state police coming from Harrison County. You had state police that ride in Washington County. You had Washington County Sheriff's Department. Might even have been some Salem police officers involved in it. So I would say there was probably a minimum of maybe 20 cars involved in the actual pursuit. Harrison County had numerous cars that were involved in it.
I just have a couple of housekeeping things. He left. You said he left at home this morning. Was that his home or?
No.
Okay, so a friend.
We had numerous sightings of Mr. Goble since he'd been released from the hospital, and we were always just you know, a minute or 2 or 5 minutes or a day late. We had other information on this particular location, and they were watching it and surveilling it this morning, and that's when they observed him come out of the house with another individual and get in the Oldsmobile.
Was it a friend's home? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And then a couple other questions. What's the relationship between Ms. Sizemore and Mr. Goble?
Don't know.
Okay.
Haven't been able to talk with her or get that information just yet. She said she loved him, so I don't know. I guess it's going to be a boyfriend-girlfriend thing, maybe.
Well, how unusual is that for somebody to come and pass the pursuit to... I assume they had to stop in the middle of the road for him to get out and get into one car and then out into the other.
I've been doing this for 45 years. That's the first time I've ever had someone pass the pursuing vehicle and the pursuit vehicle and then stop in front and pick up the person and leave. I've never seen or heard of that in my entire career.
Where did that exchange take place, approximately?
I'm not for sure right now.
But about 15 minutes in.
It was about 15 minutes into the pursuit, and I'm not really sure what that location was.
Do you know where the oil pan, approximately where that hill was?
Where that exchange took place is where the oil pan probably leaked out.
When was he released from the hospital the first go-round?
I think the first incident occurred around February the 10th, and I think he was in hospital maybe 2 weeks and then released about 2 weeks after the initial.
Okay. Now, why wasn't someone bedside with him back then?
Personnel, and he was in intensive care, and you couldn't be back there with him anyhow. He had surgery where he was shot in the abdomen, and you know, they have security there at the hospital. They know there were warrants on him. There's a hold on him, and in the past, they have security normally calls us and tells us they're getting ready to release him. and at that point we then send a unit up and they make the arrest as they come out of the hospital.
Okay, now when you say personnel.
Manpower from the police department. We don't have the manpower to put somebody in the hospital 24/7 for 2 weeks to watch somebody laying in intensive care. They're not going to get up and go anywhere. His injuries were severe enough that he was in intensive care. So normally security will keep an eye on them and they'll call us when they get ready to release them, which is normal practice or has been in the past for most cases.
Were you surprised when suddenly you called to check up on him when they told you that he was gone, or how did that all happen?
I was shocked. I've never had a problem with the university. They've always called us and told us that, you know, if somebody's only going to be in the hospital 1 or 2 days, then we'll put a guard on them. But when somebody is going through intensive care and in surgery, going to be there for weeks, we didn't know if it was going to be there 2 weeks or 2 months. So I was shocked when we heard that their new procedures were that they weren't able to release that information for HIPAA violations. Well, I don't care what their medical treatment is or what his injuries are. Just tell me you're getting ready to release him and I'll come lock him up. So we asked that they review those policies. I've never heard anything from the university, and you know, my concern for them was Metro probably deals with 3 or 4 people a week that they have shooting victims, that they have holds on them, and so that would be a bigger issue than Harrison County. I might deal with them once a year. So I just voiced my displeasure with their procedure and the fact that we put an individual out on the street that had multiple felony warrants on him and had sworn that he wouldn't be taken by the police. So this individual wasn't your normal you know, misdemeanor arrest or D felon. This was a serious felon, and just fell through the cracks.
Not to your knowledge, was this a change in university hospitals practices, or was this a change to Kentucky healthcare legislation?
I think that was the change when Kentucky, I think it's Kentucky 1 took over. Their operating procedures changed from as it was in the past because we never had a problem with the past with the university. Very, very cooperative.
Can you give me a few more details on the pit maneuver? How does that work again?
Basically, it's when an officer, they go through a tremendous amount of driving, defensive driving, and pit maneuver is done in some departments and not done in other departments, but it's where a police officer will tap the tail end of a car and put them in a spin and just spin them out of the road.
Oh, and that's what.
And that's what occurred this time. Yes.
Was the Washington County deputy's vehicle totaled?
No, just minor damage to the left front end, just the front fender and bumper. It's not a crash. It's basically just a push. You get the front end to the rear end and just push them, put them in a spin and just push them out of control. And normally you do that in an environment that's safe for everybody else. And at this particular event, he ended up in a wheat field, so there were nobody was in danger of being injured other than the persons conducting the actual maneuver.
Well, and that's why I asked you earlier, because normally you think of a pit coming up from behind and tapping the rear end of the car from behind, and the fact that he was coming the opposite way and did it.
That's why I think it was a combination of both. The officer had decided he was going to conduct that pit maneuver, and what he was going to do was clip the rear end as he went by him. However, the car came over farther than he was ready because it was just behind the driver's door where the impact occurred, and then it put them in the spin and they both went to the wheat field.
Mr. Goebel was a passenger in both vehicles, correct?
No, sir. He was a passenger in the first vehicle, and somewhere in the pursuit, we lost him for about 4 minutes. They went through a gravel road, and the dust was so bad and stuff that they lost sight of him about 4 minutes. When the actual pit maneuver was done, he was taken out of the driver's side of the car, so he definitely was driving. At some point in the pursuit, they switched drivers, and he was driving at the end of the pursuit. She drove the initial part of it, and then he finished it up.
This is a guy in the past that's been armed, chief deputy. Did he have any guns on him today? And they said there was drugs, any guns?
I haven't heard that they located any at this point.
Great.
So no injuries to anybody, community members, officers, deputies, except minor to these suspects?
Correct.